or not. So the critical yes/no decision at the end is a full council decision. What to consult on is a cabinet decision. Is that right? Because I don't want to get that wrong. So, yeah.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, Councillor Altaf Khan.
My question is regarding consultation. One of the document, and not last scrutiny, previous scrutiny came, and from the consultation, there was a zero reply from the BME communities, which the leader.
I'm really sorry. Can I just? Is this
council taken? So this is coming to this. The last asset policy was only one person replied, and the cabinet members said that these are strategic policy documents, so the public in a way not that much matter. Is that your view on this, or do you want people, ordinary Joe public like me, to take a part and reply into it, or do you have a plan to get into the wider public and all the communities to respond back to this document?
I think that was the chair said at the beginning that would be a topic of conversation once the live feed was up. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. I just because we were still on factual questions, I think it would be good if we can clarify anything that people are confused about first, and then we'll go through those as Councillor Hollingsworth outlined. And I think that is a really important question to consider. So I just wanted to double check before we move on to that, that no one has any strictly factual questions. I think my questions can wait till later, so not seeing any. Fantastic. So if we kick off that discussion.
Well, if you look at Appendix 2, you've got a consultation, an engagement plan, which sets out at a kind of strategic level and our operational level what we're looking to do. The local plan is a really crucial part of the suite of things which impact not just on current residents, but very strongly on future generations. I mean, this is going to set the scene, set the policies for buildings, developments, and so on, which are going to be here, I hope, for potentially hundreds of years. I mean, if you look at Oxford, it's got buildings that are hundreds of years old, and that seems really sort of a key objective. So the consultation on this and the input on this is absolutely critical. We will be doing a major social media campaign. We will be going to all amenity groups. We are looking at trying to set up as many face-to-face engagement meetings across the city from in all parts of the city, preferably at events that are already happening. So whether it's farmers markets at in a religious context, if that's appropriate, you know, whether it's a mosque or a church or whatever, if we can make that work logistically, it's not necessarily appropriate in all scenarios. Trying to access into schools, into FE colleges. Now, these are all quite tricky things to do. The host organisations have to reply to our emails or our phone calls to say that they're willing to do it. So we're still trying to get a yes out of Templar Square Shopping Centre, for example, where we think that would be a really good place where we can meet lots of people. But the critical thing here is that there are quite a number of people who engage with planning matters, and without being pejorative, they are predominantly old, they are predominantly white, they are predominantly male, and they are predominantly well off. So that leaves an awful lot of other people in the city that we need to get the views from and to make sure that they are taken into account in the local plan. I think my view is that if you look around, say, the county of Oxfordshire, or indeed more widespread, those who express views on planning are very often those who already live in large houses, are well off, are well established, and are secure. And the voices who are not heard are those who are in precarious housing, who are less well off, who have insecure employment and do not have access to the community assets and indeed the societal assets that those better off people have. So we will be making every effort we can to engage with people. I can't remember the figure from last time, maybe Rachel, Amanda will, but the responses in written terms to our previous consultation on the last local plan 2036 ran into the thousands, I believe. And I know that the social media engagement with our campaign then was at that point the largest engagement with the social media campaign of any campaign we'd ever done, even more so than the then leaders' perorations on something. So I was the most engaged with person, as it were, and we need to do more of the same, because, as I said, the crucial thing is there are too many voices who simply don't get heard when it comes to planning, and particularly, I think, of younger generations whose city this will be long after we're all gone.
Can I come back to one question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the crucial point you just mentioned, heard. If people hear it, they will reply it. And you're right on the categories you said who replies normally. But if the word goes out and the more people hear it and they know something is happening, then they will, I'm sure. And the community centers, libraries, a number of other places, and some sort of a council leaflet suggesting to go onto line, or the ways you can have your input. That's I think that the publicity is the most key part, and the people hear it. If they hear it, they will reply.
Thank you.
So, there will be a leaflet which will go to every single household in the city. I think all of us, probably everyone in this room, has delivered a lot of leaflets over their time, and I think we probably acknowledge as politicians not everybody remembers our leaflets when they go through the door, so we will be backing that up with, as I said, social media campaigns. We will try and use the local media, whether it's the Oxford Mail or the BBC and things, to kind of draw attention to what's going on. Last time, I'm not sure whether we'll be able to do it this time, but last time we used the video screens on the buses. So it was quite alarming for me. I quite often sat on a bus and my own face appeared kind of like 2 feet in front of me. And that's something I'm not wildly comfortable with. But nonetheless, it is, as you say, it's important. We're also, and this is where I'm going to pass over to my colleagues, so I'm not quite sure where we've got to on this. We have to tailor the questions we ask to a whole series of different audiences. So, for example, we've got statutory consultees like the Civic Society, CPRE, or, big pressure groups like that, who want to have a very detailed say. So we'd have a questionnaire of like 35, 40 odd questions with lots of scope for them to answer. And anything less than that, they would see as being ephemeral and somewhat patronizing. But that's for them. For somebody who's quite interested maybe in one area, maybe around climate change, maybe around housing need, they'd want to focus in on 3, 4, 5 questions about that. And one of the things we learned from last time was that if the social media engagement, which you have a link to, click here or follow this QR code or whatever, you've got very few seconds to capture somebody before they go off and do something else. The eyeballs, I think the eyeball time is 30 to 60 seconds before they do something else. So to make it meaningful, we've got to ask their really very simple questions. They're not quite yes, no, but it might be, what 3 words do you associate with your city or something like that? And that then means we've got 3 very different sorts of consultation, and translating that into meaningful input is a challenge. But I think it's right for us to try and do that here, rather than expect this extremely disparate group of people that we're trying to consult with, either to all answer 38 questions on their phone while they're on a bus, or equally, reduced down to a very simplistic level. And you've got to do it differently. So that means we have to do it. So that was a challenge which I am aware Amanda and I discussed at some length earlier this week without necessarily resolving exactly how it was to be done. But I entirely trusted Amanda, Rachel, and all the rest of them to work it out.
I've got some specific questions around that are partly clarity and might come across as very stupid. It's basically about how the preferred options document itself interacts with those forms of consultation. So, for example, if I'm interested in the climate and I see it pop up on my Twitter when I'm on the bus, and I click that link and it's got some maybe 5 questions which will feed into the consultation, will that then be considered part of the formal consultation? Okay, that's a yes, fantastic. And then is there an option, I guess, to integrate? So if you do manage to capture that person's attention and say, link in some of those more detailed bits of analysis about, I guess, maybe why you're asking those questions, or even some of those tables from the preferred options document into that. And then finally, are there people, I guess, that are going to just read the preferred options document because they've got a lot of time, which might explain some of the demographics that often comment on these things. But then is there a way that within that document itself, I was thinking when I was reading it, I was going, oh, I'm not quite sure which ones of these were in the last local plan and which ones are completely new. And I know it said, but if you're, when I was on page 200, I was thinking, okay, I'm not going to read every single sort of word of every single sentence. Would there be a way to introduce almost like a key into it, so that when you're looking, if you wanted to have that deeper level of engagement, you could and maybe you're new to it as well, and hopefully we get some people excited about planning from different demographics based on this. Would there be a way to integrate that to slightly make the whole long document more accessible? Did that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
So those are really good points, and I really appreciate all the attention that you're giving to this, because we are giving it a lot and learning a lot, particularly Alex's point about how we keep the people interested on a smartphone. So we're talking to our, we're fortunate we've got young people in our team, so I delegate these issues because I am not so good, but getting better. And so we are addressing that issue. In terms of the focus, we're kind of on the 3 themes which we focused our leaflet on, which is around the 15-minute city, the climate change issues, and housing economy. So we want to ensure that people kind of see that as the kind of overarching framework of the plan, and therefore can engage at that the level that they want to specifically. And of course, at the events, there's one sense we want to be standing in, I don't know, Gloucester Green on a Wednesday and just having a 2-minute chat to people to get their attention. And then there's also that opportunity to sort of talk in more detail to those that can. And I think with the team, and we're a good team because we're diverse, we're of age, all sorts. So it's sort of, I think the fact that it'll be me there with, say, one of our apprentices is really good, because it means that we kind of attract different people by who we are, if you see what I mean. So that's a really positive thing. The team we've got working on this and working with I have to say, I'm just so impressed by their proactiveness. I said, well, what about, they went to the Kassam last week to talk about being there for one of the football matches. And then I said, well, go around all the supermarkets and we can be outside. So we can mix, we can do that. We're also thinking about like we're going to have post boxes at the hubs, so we can leave leaflets there, the library issue. So, and also we also want to say, what have we missed? We've mapped it spatially to work out where in the city we need to be. We want to make sure we're covering every area. We are aware that we aren't going into the best of the weather, so we're kind of being realistic about that. So I kind of see that, as Alex said, we've got the the long kind of response for the kind of statutory people, those who have the time. We've got the sort of, I've just got a mock-up of the leaflet that will be going to every household, and that we'll be also having at the community centres, libraries, all the post box places. And then we're going to this sort of social media campaign, which I can't give you chapter and verse on at the moment, but that is going to be that kind of get those few minutes of how we can get a response. And then we're already thinking about how we meaningfully take all of this and address it to get the consultation responses correct, and that they really inform the drafting of the policies. And that's when last time we had workshops with, some of you may have been in them, with members to sort of thrash out policies, particularly these ones which are the more challenging, and the sites policies. And do you remember we did those in the town hall, and we'd want to be setting up a series of those. And then your point, which is totally fallen out of my head, but
policies.
Yeah, yes. So was that what we've done so far, and we really did it for you actually, which I haven't shared, was Alex has asked already, we've already done that sort of spreadsheet of this is what we've got now, this is how we address it, or this is where we've gone further. And I suppose what I think you're saying is take that kind of piece of work, but make it, color code it, do something meaningful with it to make it accessible, which actually is it's a very good idea. Thank you. And we'll take that away and work out how we can get that into some consultation material.
Brilliant. I might suggest we put that as a recommendation.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, I am seeing a few hands, and thank you very much. I feel like I've got a much better sense of it now. I think I saw Councillor Arshad's hand first. So, and then actually, could we just wait a second? Could you everyone put their hands high in the air, please, so I can see? I'm very short. Yes, so I can see Councillor Miles, Councillor Hunt, and Councillor Coyne. Went in the wrong order there. Fantastic. So I think we'll go around this way. Does that make sense?
So mine's just a quick question. I just wanted to find out, following on from Liz's point, is do you have any facility for like second language speakers, or any like drop-in sessions if people wanted to come? Is that something you could organise, or?
I think we might need to take that one away and think about it. I mean, the consultation part of the communities team obviously deals with second language consultation, where people don't have English as a first language or don't have English at all. We'd need to talk to them about the extent to which we can address these issues. I think translating the full document into other languages might be beyond our budget and capacity, but certainly some of the shorter stuff I think we can have a look at. So can we take that one away without making any firm commitments? Is that all right?
Would you like that to be a recommendation? Okay. Councillor Coyne, I think.
So just we will be delivering a leaflet through every door and every business. Sorry. So every household and every business in Oxford will receive a leaflet. My approach to that when I've been proofreading it is, if this landed on my mum's doorstep, would she throw it away or would she stop and look at it? That's the real test for us, is making it accessible. I'd love everybody in the city to be aware of this consultation. I can't make them respond. I can do everything I can to make things accessible and easy to engage with. But if I can make it visible, that's a real objective of mine. So it will be posters in doctors' surgeries, for example, an item on a school newsletter. Those are the sorts of things I think can help us reach out. And they're a bit more physical rather than the digital. So as much as I can do of that, the better. And we've got a very long list of residents associations and organisations, amenity groups, and I'm going to be asking each of those to mail out to their own network and get the word out so that people are aware of it. That's another really useful tactic we've got. We've got so many active organisations in the city with big membership lists that if we can do a mail out and encourage people to take a look, then that'd be really helpful.
Councillor Hunt.
Really building on those 2 points. I mean, the fact is, I've never filled in a consultation regarding a local plan. I've lived in Oxford for 7 years. I mean, they've completely passed me by. So, I mean, it was 2 things. Is this a particularly important one, given what we're facing ecologically, given the climate breakdown, given everything that we're now dealing with in terms of resources? You know, is that reflected in the way in which it's going to be presented? In the language, which I've done a bit, you know, I've already done that workshop with you regarding some aspects of this, because in which case, yes, it's, you know, is it business as usual, i.e. it's the next local plan, or is this something that we really need to get behind in a bigger way for all the reasons I've just outlined?
We'll pick that up. I mean, it's kind of both, and that's not a terribly helpful answer, I know, but the things that are in the 2036 plan are, for example, we have some of the most ambitious zero carbon policies of any local plan in the country, and we're proposing to go further than that in this plan. So we're taking something we're already doing and trying to go further. On social housing, which I'd argue is, you know, sort of as a particular issue facing Oxford, we have one of the furthest reaching, most ambitious affordable housing policies of any local plan in the country. And despite the government's best efforts to muck it up with first homes, we are keeping that. So we're retaining that degree of ambition. So there's both continuity and change. I think in terms of how the consultation might work, I think that it's probably quite easy to kind of, you know, claim something radical in order to grab people's attention. But if that's not something that can actually be delivered by a local plan, then I think that's potentially misleading, and in the end isn't massively helpful. And I think I don't know, if I look to another district council in Oxfordshire. In fact, actually, I won't do that because that's controversial. I'll look at a district council in Essex, where there's a change of power administration of independents elected on the basis of being able to ignore planning law and do what they want. And the consequences of that have been calamitous for them. They've lost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds in failed appeals. They've now had their entire planning system effectively taken over by the government, and they can deliver nothing. And, you know, and I think that's the kind of thing you've got to be careful to avoid. We're operating here within a constrained system. This isn't a political leaflet setting out a philosophy which any of us can and should be doing as politicians. It's a consultation by the local authority on something which is governed by some pretty extensive constraints in terms of legislation. So, sorry, that's kind of halfway between two, but that, nonetheless, we should be drawing attention to where we are trying to be radical within those confines, and that I think is what we're doing. Certainly, when it comes to the social media, we'll be pushing those elements.
And to add to that, I mean, if we're not busy enough, we're also, and today I've been drafting a brief because we need to. There's an evidence base behind all of the work we do, and one of the, well, yesterday and today we've just commissioned or put on the South East Business Portal our brief for viability consultants, because we need to make sure that our policies are deliverable. So that piece of work, and then also one on the net zero feasibility to see how far we can to achieve the most ambitious policies, what's actually deliverable. So that also is going on. That's all part of getting to the draft plan. This will help inform the policies alongside the consultation.
Thank you. Does that, yeah, fantastic. And Councillor Miles.
First of all, thank you for your hard work on this. You mentioned about the use of radio to communicate with people. I wonder whether you've looked at using podcasts to find a way to allow people to access the content without having to read it, because it's a lot of paper, and that will put people off, whereas listening to it or extracts or summaries, maybe it's a conversation with Councillor Hollingsworth or someone online that people might be able to do while they're cooking, or might be one approach, whether or not you're considering something like that. The second thing you mentioned about interest groups, going to the football, tapping into different community groups. I wondered whether you'd considered vocational groups, because the issue that we have here in Oxford is, unfortunately, because of the cost of living here, there are some key vocational groups that work here but aren't able to live here. And I feel we really need to ensure that they're engaged in the process, because we would hope for a sustainable city in the future they would be able to live here, and their views are taken into account to shape the place that allows for that. So if we could look at that, and I think examples, teachers, nurses, or also looking from the business perspective, whether it's the small business owners as opposed to just the big businesses, those who work as freelancers, those who are in vulnerable employment but sort of in the gig economy, and thinking of it like that. Then the final question and point, you mentioned schools. I mean, this is our children's future we're talking about, and we really want to ensure that we're meeting sort of their expectations. And actually, if you speak to any child, they will have strong views around climate change, climate emergency, active travel, all these things. So to what extent are you able to engage with them? Is it there a lesson plan that you could have with a teacher and generate feedback or focus groups with schools? Because it would be a shame not to hear their views as well. So it's something that we could do to engage with them, and primary school as well as secondary, because primary school children have views too. Thank you.
Taking that in reverse order, and skipping over some of them to leave space. Certainly, we would love to engage with primary school children and secondary school. I've done sessions on planning issues with a primary school, and to be honest, I got better questions and more engagement out of the 10-year-olds than I've sometimes got out of secondary school children. I think it is important to get those that engagement with young people, though, and one of the things that the 2050 plan did, and we will be using this work, was some very successful engagement with FE college students, that's sort of 16 to 19. And it's quite interesting looking at what were the high priorities for them, because when you teased it out, it was about secure employment and the fact that looking around Oxfordshire, they didn't think they'd ever be able to live here. So climate change, ecological issues, very important, definitely. In the end, not as important to them as having somewhere stable to live and somewhere stable to work. And I think that was something which I think was a very helpful counterbalance to some of the views that expressed elsewhere. So we'll certainly be making use of that and trying to replicate that. Podcasts, I like the idea of people kind of sending themselves to sleep, listening to me drone on about paragraph 35 soundness tests or whatever. I don't know whether we have the capacity for that within the consultation team, and we are at this point, I think, possibly treading onto their turf. But I'm up for it, and you can tell, I'd happily talk for hours about planning. Whether anyone would be interested as a result, I don't know, but we'll try and make that happen. On the vocational groups, I think that's a really important point, and I know that round the room here, we have people who've got close engagement with representatives of vocational groups, whether it's through trade unions or whatever. We'd certainly love to hear from representatives of vocational groups. We do hear from employers groups about the difficulties they have around recruitment. I think anyone who's looked at social media over the last week and seen what Oxford Bus Company are tweeting will be well aware of the crisis we currently have and shortage of bus drivers, for example. We know that recruitment for schools and recruitment for the health service is a problem. I think it would be really good if representatives of those, whether it's formal organisations like trade unions or the Royal Colleges or less formal groups, I think all of those things could be really positive, and we would very much like to hear from them, because those are voices who don't normally respond to local plan documents because they don't see it as about them. But I would say affordable housing, affordable workspace, absolutely crucial. And small businesses, it's a bit hit and miss. Small businesses groups, we do hear from the Federation, and there's local groups. And again, hearing from individual small business owners and the issues that they face, I think that would be really helpful. But it can be, I'm a small business owner, trying to fit something else in is difficult.
Sorry, thank you. We had Pedro, who you may, if you haven't met him yet, you have that treat. He is wonderful with he's our air quality officer, and he's wonderful about engagement. And I was last year working with his team, and so picked up a few ideas about schools, because he's got a good network, and there is an officer we're working with. So I have tried to piggyback off some of those ideas to get some material into schools. Resource-wise, getting the team into schools probably is probably too much at this stage with all our other and then we have reached out to JR. We're hoping we could do something at the JR, but I think they're kind of quite resistant, understandably, because still on the back of COVID. So we've done all the kind of usual things. We've had some good discussions with Matt Peachy, who's in charge of the economy team, and we've got a lot of engagement going on within their existing structures, like Talk of the Town or City Centre Task Force. So the Oxford Strategic Partnership, some of those you might think are too formal, because I think you want to go beyond that. But if there's something specific that you think is achievable, then please send them our way. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm going to suggest that we take Councillor Rowley on this sort of section of the discussion and then move on. But if anyone's got a point they'd like to make before we move on, please indicate now. Not seeing. We're staying on the plan consultation, but we're going to move on to a different topic, if that's okay. Fantastic. Councillor Rowley, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I think what Councillor Miles said is really important, and particularly for obvious reasons, consultations like these tend to be more accessible to people who already have secure housing than to people who are in need of it, and that's a balance that we need to address. In fact, I think Councillor Miles's point is so important, I wonder if we could make it a recommendation to make special efforts to approach occupational groups like trade unions, small business associations and so forth, and also groups that have participation from people in housing need, like Crisis, Aspire, even Acorn, to try to gather some of those opinions of people who are in housing need.
That sounds like a great idea. I can see lots of nodding, and I think, yep, I've got that noted down. Fantastic. So next, I'm going to suggest that we discuss, should we move on to, I'll leave sort of the green areas till last. If we move on to development sites and areas of focus, which is chapter 8 of the document, if I recall correctly. Does anyone have any questions of clarification or any questions at all initially? I can see one. I'll just ask for everyone's hands up so I can see. Okay, and I've got one. Oh, and another. Okay, fantastic. Councillor Mundy, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So I just got looking at 813, the university sites. I just wanted to know how specifically can be with regard to the housing, the residential commercial university sites, whether we can be as specific as we would be in relation to the affordability of that accommodation. But you consider obviously the workers at university, if they're going to be going to actually working at the university, I'm going to must need that accommodation, but at least I can go to live in town and only this and also in relation to parking, I haven't seen anything about parking there, and I'm pretty sure that observatory doesn't have about car park. Is that right? Okay. Well, anyway, but in relation to parking anyway, just to be sure that, you know, there would be this, you know, the same strict criteria on that. Was not going to be a favour of that. That's residential.
Amanda's the queen of the parking policy, so I'll leave that to her. The university side, so the employer related side, this was a policy we introduced at our last local plan. It was quite a difficult balance to get right, and we have started to see sites coming forward. In essence, what we were trying to do is where you've got a site like one owned, say, by a university, so within its own campus, where they're never going to build ordinary housing on it. It's just because they're not, because of the way it works. Same with a hospital, they're not going to build ordinary housing on it. The difficulty we had was that those weren't coming forward at all because our requirement for on-site social housing policy. So what we did was to create essentially a small category of sites which were being brought forward for housing related to that employer's needs. So the obvious example, we've got one at John Radcliffe coming forward at the moment, where the hospital trust is going to build housing for its staff. And as a result, we are not going to insist on on-site social housing provision. So the exception was, what we had to do was to prevent sites which would have come forward anyway, coming forward. So if the university or college owned a piece of land and it wanted to kind of sell it off, we didn't want to lose the social housing, so it has to be within these very constrained campuses. So within that confine, we would look at each site on its merits. I mean, I think it's probably true. I'm certainly from conversations with the university, pretty much every single level of university employee finds it difficult to afford housing. I know whether that's at the most junior technician or researcher level, right the way up to internationally renowned professors, struggling to find some equivalent, and that's an issue. We know that's also the case for the NHS. So I think we'd be open to kind of a broad range of housing within, as long as it was available at those affordable rates. So I think each one has to be judged on its merits. What we're trying to do here, as Amanda said, is we're setting a framework within which the planning committee can make its decisions, and this policy added a degree of flexibility that didn't previously exist and actually was therefore counterproductive. I think that's probably sums that up. Parking, however.
Yeah, well, actually, can I just adding to that, but the area of focus up in the north, there is sites like the Oxford University sports ground, and that currently is allocated for, we market and affordable. So, and so obviously that is sitting there, that it would not be allowed for as a sort of student accommodation. We don't consider that to be inappropriate. So we've sort of stood firm on our site allocations in the existing plan, and we wouldn't be expecting change there. So because we need to deliver, because we're not going to deliver any affordable if we don't deliver market housing because of the system. Yes, parking. Currently we have policy M3 in the local plan, which sort of has certain criteria whereby sites, if they meet, like they're within a controlled parking zone, they are within a certain distance of shop or facility just to buy basic groceries, and also a regular 15-minute bus service, and then we would consider them to be suitable to be car free because it's realistic. And in terms of how that's performed, interestingly, we've had some appeals, particularly on sort of subdivisions of plots where the inspectors supported us in that policy. We've had a recent decision at Jack Straw's Lane where it's not gone so well, and it's quite an interesting way that policy has been, well, how the inspector has worded that, which I need to give some more attention to. Not so encouraging. However, we consider that obviously we all know we're talking about it. There's not enough land. We can't meet all our needs within the city. Why would we use most of our land to park cars? So we are continuing the approach, downward pressure on car parking. So we will be having a sort of criteria-based approach like we have now. The actual detail of that, I mean, it has been challenging for our DM officers and consistency. We really want to, as we draft that policy, really test it, because I think we expected our inspector to kind of be a bit more back and forth, and that didn't happen through the hearing. So I kind of think that I've learned a lot drafting policies around parking. However, I'm kind of confident that we're going to still be pursuing that low car, no car, and we want to see more car clubs, more active travel. I mean, that is generally what, as a nation we're seeing, and Oxford is always been at the forefront of this. So, and the universities, I mean, depending who you speak to in the universities, they are supportive of, our net zero policies. They are the ones who are delivering the ambitious projects. But yeah, in that city centre, there's quite a lot of hidden car parking, I know. But we always,
there are others.
yeah, no, yeah, it's quite sort of interesting who has a right to drive in. But we also got the as with the changes with the bus filters, zero emission zones, all these things will preclude cars just being able to drive in and out as they were. Does that help?
Hopefully this is the right place to bring this up, but I wanted to ask about the policy on viability considerations, which I sort of fitted into this kind of development policies area. I just wanted to ask about, concerned about the wording of that and how we make sure that whilst there's I guess there's a policy in place that if things aren't going to be viable to do any development, if we apply all these policies, how are you going to make sure that it's not just a get out clause? I think it's also a bit concerning that it specifically mentions that the policies that people could claim they can't deliver are the environmental ones, and they are the ones about affordable housing, which are arguably some of the most important policies in there.
Yeah, this is tricky stuff. It's easier than it used to be. Government closed some of the loopholes that the viability test had opened up a few years ago, but you still need to have that kind of safety valve, as it were, of a viability clause. I guess, as well as being the most important, they're also the most expensive. So they're the ones most likely to make a scheme unviable, particularly the social housing. The affordable housing policy is by a country mile the single most expensive thing we do. We think the second most expensive thing is probably the parking policy. And then the zero carbon stuff is a third, but a fairly distant third, I think, when it comes to it. There's a premium to do it, but it's nowhere near as expensive. So just to give a kind of ballpark figure, if I remember rightly from Oxford North's discussions on viability, the difference between the market value of a home on the Oxford North development and the social housing value, it's about a 70% reduction in value. So, if it was a £500,000 value, then that's reduced by 70% if it's a social house. It's those kinds of figures that you'd be talking about. I use that as a hypothetical, and you can go and dig out the reports to find out the actual numbers. But those are the sorts of figures that you would expect in a high value area like Oxford, where market value for house prices is crucial. So the wording of this is absolutely critical. What we are doing here is taking our existing policy, where the safety valve is entirely the social housing, and mentioning some of the other policies. So there is a slight shift there, which we think we need to do. It's to some extent related to the fact that we're not going to have enough space for our housing need, and that we can't be seen to be constraining the ability to bring forward sites in the city while telling our neighbours over the boundaries to bring forward sites in their area. But it is, I think, an area where the wordsmithing of the final policy, when we come to Regulation 19, is going to be one we will have our barristers crawling all over. There are some policies which I think we're all kind of happy to sign off. There are ones where you want the best QC you can get on, and that is categorically one of them. But as it's a requirement to have that safety valve. It's then a question of how you word it.
And I was saying, I mentioned earlier, we've just put the brief out for the viability on the portal today, actually, and we've added a we're aware at the moment we're in this volatile situation with build costs going through the roof and uncertainty around because of a whole range of factors. But that's a kind of we did that snapshot in time that we don't want that. This is a plan to 2040, and retrofitting is more expensive than delivering net zero now. So all these issues we really want to explore. And then we're using the kind of the outputs from the carbon feasibility work need to be fed into that viability work. So.
Does that address you? Yeah, fantastic. And then Councillor Arshad.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question with regards to the south area proposed development outside. I represent, for those who don't know, represent Temple Cowley. And I can see that obviously the Cowley Marsh Depot, if this is released for housing, as well as the little remaining area for allocation between Towns Road, would that be affordable housing? And the second question is, overall, that obviously with the limited spaces that we do have, would the rooms of the sizes of those new accommodation be smaller than usual, or would they, how would that work? Yeah, that's the two questions: size and affordability.
We have policy on room sizes, so unless the planning committee for some reason saw fit to ignore the room size policy, then they'd be the same size. I mean, you can never rule anything out. Somebody might come forward with an innovative proposal on a site for kind of mini rooms or something, but I mean, I can't honestly see either our planners or our planning committee going for that. Certainly would not be supported by our policies. On the affordability, all sites would be subject to the same affordable housing policies. So any site brought forward wherever it was, whether it's in your area or somewhere else, would be bound by the same policies. There's no difference. That just to be clear, that isn't always the case in local plan. So for example, I think West Ops, which is local plan, has different quantities of social housing depending on where it is, reflecting the different values of housing there. We have the same policy for the entire city, so it would be required by that. Again, going back to Councillor Pegg's question, if there was a reason why a particular site couldn't achieve it and it could be demonstrated using the, so for example, you talked about a depot. If a depot had contaminated land which had exceptional costs to clear up, that might be a reason. I don't know, but you'd need to evidence it. You can't just claim it. And in terms of the sites you mentioned, I mean, clearly, if the landowners are still wishing to promote them, then they'll stay in, and that's a critical thing. So for all sites, we don't list sites in the local plan if the landowner isn't willing to bring them forward, because it creates a rod for our own back. Then essentially we've kind of, without wanting to get into the technicalities of it, we need to deliver 100% of our sites because we need more housing than we can deliver. So there is literally no point in us allocating sites which the landowner has no interest in bringing forward. So we could start drawing things on a map and saying we want some houses here, but if the landowner's not interested in it, then it would be a waste of time. So we don't do that. So the sites that eventually end up in the local plan will be ones where the landowner is willing to have it built on.
And then I think I saw Councillor Miles's hand.
It relates a little bit to the point around the sites where there's a reference, I think, in various of the sites to ensuring good connectivity by foot and cycle. And my question is, how are we defining good? Because are we defining segregated or separate as opposed to mixing motor vehicles and bikes, for instance? That I think needs to be clarified. And with the point regarding car-free development, I think sometimes, as I understand it, the debate is not always about whether it's car-free, but it's where the cars are relative to the public realm space, to ensure that it's a safe place for children or anyone to be playing, for instance. And I know that in the Netherlands, elsewhere, where you're having some of these sites that do have parking still, that is totally separate, and people drop their cars off and then have to walk to their front doors through a car-free zone nearest the houses. So just wondering whether you've contemplated that at all, and whether that can be referenced as part of the public realm improvements as well. Thank you.
This is sort of entering into kind of interesting things for a local plan, because this is where you kind of stretch to the outer edges of what a local plan can and can't do, particularly in an urban context. So if I kind of set it up as a difficult thing and then ask Amanda and Rachel to answer it as best they can. On the first point, two things are challenging. One is that pretty much now we are at the end, or close to the end, of large sites within the Oxford boundary. What we've now got is medium and small sites. Barton Park was the last really big one, which means that what we've got is a series of small sites which aren't coterminous. So it's not like we're building a walloping great big urban extension and we can then design in to it the connectivity, the segregated cycle routes and things like that. What we tend to have is a patch where, you know, a landowner or developer controls a bit there, then there's a bit that's already built up, and then there's another bit and things. So it is quite difficult to get the bit in between to work. So we're reliant heavily on the Highways Authority, the Transport Authority, County Council. We're also to some extent reliant on their definition of good when it comes to how development should be planned. And I know there are extremely strong views expressed. I don't know if you've had Graham Smith come to talk to Scrutiny recently. You'd need to bring a little beeper to interrupt his more angry invective about the county council. But I think in the past, it has been very obvious that street design starts from the point of view of motor car engineering, and then pedestrians and cyclists are a pretty distant third and fourth behind cars and lorries when it comes to the shape of roads, segregation, how it works, where pedestrian desire lines go, and all the rest of it. So there's some challenges there, and trying to deliver connectivity outside sites is a challenge for the local plan, because you can only set policy for sites that are being brought forward, not the bits in between. That needs to be done through a different process. And on the second issue, I completely agree about the being inspired by the Dutch, and it's the Woondorf approach to residential development. It's something that we'd need to pick up through probably some kind of design code, the design code element. Now, the previous government, I know we changed governments this morning, so who knows what's now, but the previous government had been very keen on taking a design code approach. Essentially, their idea of an ideal local plan would be to have some site allocations and a design code, and all the rest of the policies could disappear as far as they were concerned. That was the extreme end, but I think there is a case there there has always been a case for trying to use design codes, and essentially that's what we're doing with the West End and Oseney Mead SPD. That's to some considerable extent a design code for that area. So it's whether we can pick that up in the design elements and the policies. We may need to pick it up as supplementary documents, which we then have to bring forward in due course, but I'd need to check on capacity and ability to do that.
Should I fill you in on what we've sort of been doing, which I feel is even better than last time? So we've got a really good urban design team at the moment. We are very good, strong position, which is a much better place. So we've got some very good officers who are supporting us. So we've taken all our what we think will be site allocations this time around. And James, who's our urban design, he's trained us all and set up us to go out to all of the sites. And then we've done our assessments, and then he's reviewed them, because we want to try and deliver more kind of more detailed site allocation. So we're in these areas, like some would say the housing company sites, which will which probably we have got more scope, we've got more buy-in to do that. We're kind of looking at where we can do that. And so using James's expertise. And so we want to kind of try and get some more of that detail in. So that's one way through. And then we're also with Rosa, the other urban designer, working on how we can get that design code element in. So that's kind of the intention. So did you want to add further?
I was just going to say that in the local plan, we can set out the principles and the intention. So this is what the City Council considers to be a pedestrian favourable environment, for example. This is the kind of neighbourhood quality we want of the public realm. And we can set those general parameters in the local plan. Where we can add extra detail on specific sites in the allocation, we will definitely do that. And when we can supplement the general themes with further work in the future, if that proves to be helpful, we'll do that too. So it's absolutely the intent that neighbourhoods are livable, playable spaces and friendly for the pedestrian. And we will use every tool we can to try and push that agenda, working with our colleagues at the county as well. So.
Fantastic. I can see some more hands. I think I saw, did you have a follow-up point to make as well?
That's a different question.
Okay, I'm just going to ask my question first of all, so my next on my list, and I can see two there. Can I see anyone else who wants to contribute before we move on to the next topic, barring anything else coming up? I wanted mine's really a question for clarity about the difference, I guess, between site allocations and areas of focus. So my understanding is that you'd have sort of, areas of focus for a particular area, but also in addition, site allocation policies, and those would interact with each other. What is on page 256, I guess, I'm looking at as an example for the northern edge of Oxford. There's an alternative option, which is to include a different combination of sites within the area of focus or different mixes of land use. So would that just be basically the same thing, but with some things at a lower level tweak, like what sites were included in, or of the existing sites, what they're specific, and it's not really, it's adding in an extra thing on top. It's not removing anything from the previous, because when I was reading the bits above it, I mean, this is coming from a very layman perspective, I guess, but it almost read a little bit like the areas of focus were in some ways going to supplant the site allocations, but I don't know if that, and maybe we're gonna, I don't know, because in my head I was like, oh, that mean there's more flexibility or something? But I don't know but that's right.
Well, when it's helpful to have you asking that, because it shows it lacks clarity and we need to address that. So the area of focus is where we've kind of highlighted these as kind of areas that will see a lot of change over the plan period. Okay. That one particularly because we've got the edge of the Charwell, the unmet need sites there, and so a lot of change going on. But it's sort of some general principles that we would expect to come forward in that area, and then the site and then underneath that will be specific site allocation policies. Like, for example, Alex mentioned the West End. We've got within the West End at the moment in the current plan, we've got like certain policies. So does that clarify? But I think we need to probably just look at the wording there if that's not clear.
Yeah, I might just add a recommendation to basically clarify the
purpose of it.
The purpose of it and how it interacts with what's already existing. Alex, sorry.
Yeah, we did sort of chew over the fact we've got quite a number of different designations here. What we were trying to respond to in particular was that where there are a number of allocations in a particular part of the city, or in this case, part of the city and over the border, that raises more issues than just that one allocation on its own. It's the combination of them. And I think have a Littlemore councillor here probably reflects on that being true in the case of Littlemore. And the intention is it will enable us to focus on how the things interact together, and therefore what issues at a higher level we need to address, whether that's infrastructure needs, connectivity point, how the things will interact together as a collective. So it's avoiding it just being a sum of the parts. It's trying to be a bit more than that. It also sort of ties into some of these notions around 15-minute cities and neighbourhoods and things like that. But this is where this is particularly where there's a lot of site allocations coming forward. I think the alternative option that you're picking up is if somebody comes forward with several other sites in this area, which we don't yet know about, but if they do, that would potentially change how we consider it.
That makes sense. Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Quraish and then Councillor Al-Tabkam, and I think I didn't see any other hands. So then I'm going to, oh, sorry, Councillor Arshad, and then I think we might move on to the next topic.
Okay. I would like only really a clarification of the concept of 15-minute city. Of course, when I read and I'm sorry if in the beginning clarify this point because I was late. Because when I read that, I read 15 minutes walk of their homes, but in other paragraph I said 15 minutes walk and cycling. I think this concept will be, in my perspective, very useful, like Councillor Alex said, to access what the infrastructures need in any area in the city council. But in my perspective, this is for example, if it's 15 minutes by cycling, this concept instead to be useful will be no effective. For example, from Littlemore, a lot of residents struggle to access the health centers and so on. If it's 15 minutes by cycling, is almost from Littlemore, is not, but it's almost from Littlemore to city center. What does mean the area is very big? This is why I would like only to understand if the concept is by walk, what if my perspective is by walk is correct. If it's walk and cycling, in my perspective, at the moment, in my fact, will be very ineffective. Thank you.
Well, I mean, the starting point is walk, but clearly then you think about what do you want within a few minutes walk? Do you want a shop? You want maybe a place of worship that's easy to get to, a primary school and so on. Things which are more kind of regional, your local hospital or something like that. That can be further away. So I think there's obviously distances. We're not trying to kind of say everyone must be within 15 minutes slow walk or 800 meters or whatever of a conference center and a hospital and a theatre with 2,000 seats, but a play area, a school, a shop where you can get your daily provisions, those sorts of things. I mean, it's something which we're using a new term. It's actually embedded in the current local plan. It's just implicit rather than explicit. That's partly because I got seduced by the word polycentricity and things, but I think it's a really important point, and it was really reinforced by the pandemic, the importance of it, which is for communities to work best, people need to be able to meet each other face to face in their streets, outside their shops, outside their homes. And if you don't have those facilities closer by, so that if you're driving to your flat and then you're going up in a lift just on your own and you're disappearing in, that atomization is both an individual problem but a societal problem. So it's trying to address, I think, quite a profound issue in terms of how urban lives happen. And so on. So it does two things. I think it does the thing you identify. It helps to go, okay, within 15 minutes of this centre, we've got this and this, but we don't have that. How can we go about delivering that? And that may not be something we can deliver through the local plan, but a local plan is a means of identifying that absence and making it a priority. But it's also about making the city a series of urban villages. It's about neighborhoods, which is then about a unit of interaction at a human scale, rather than just thinking about buildings and roads, which, I think we would all argue planning shouldn't do, but sometimes in the past has been guilty of. And I think we would probably reflect on the fact that planning is done best when it's done with people at its heart, a sort of a Patrick Geddes approach as opposed to a Patrick Abercrombie. And if you don't know who those two people are, then there's a bit of Wikipedia reading for you.
Thank you. Councillor Altaf Khan.
Yeah, question regarding the sites who were previously on the plan. Would they be repeated again, or be just added new one? Is like updating registered, or what is the methodology? Because I know and I do understand if the site was previously on the plan and now is not, the landowner still can put a planning application, doesn't stop them doing that. But what will happen will be continuity of the people knowing what's coming in their neighborhood. And that's what happened one of the planning application recently. So it'd be just, I think, good the sites were previously and adding on the new one, so the people have their say in this stage and then later at the planning application stage as well.
So this new local plan will supersede the old one. So we've got a good list of sites that we did in the 2036 plan, and we've started by going through those. If they've been delivered, if they've been built out, we've taken them off the list. If they haven't, we've left them on the list, and we've looked at whether the allocation we gave them at the time is still appropriate. We've contacted the developer, are they still interested? And if the answer to the are they still available is yes, we've kept them on the list. We may change what the allocation is if there's proven to be over time there's been a necessary change to that. What we've done in addition is we've done a call for sites. So we've been out and we've asked, do you have any extra sites that weren't available last time that are this time? So it might be a site that we liked the look of last time, but the developer said no, the landowner said no. Now maybe it's available and it comes onto the list for the 2040 plan. As Councillor Hollingsworth said, it's really important that we cannot allocate a site with no landowner interest. So we go back and we do that and we recheck. And it's not a one-off check. Throughout the year, members of our team will contact developers and say, landowners, are you still interested in this site? Is there anything holding you up? Is there anything we can do to help bring that site forward? So it's an ongoing process of updating the list, but lots of the ones that were in the 2036 plan will come through to the 2040 plan if they haven't yet been delivered and they're still available. Does that help?
Brilliant, thank you. And Councillor Arshad.
Thank you so much. I had a question. Obviously, I'm really grateful for Oxford City Council for the amount of affordable homes that are coming forward, especially my time in the cabinet as well. I'm really, really grateful, and I'm sure the people of the city are as well. My question really relates to the biodiversity net gain, and I wanted to find out if there's a certain policy. Given that we've got climate emergency and we are working to a very good plan, there's two parts of the question really. So with regards to the biodiversity net gain, is that plan going to be proposed in time for before November 2023? And the second question is, are key considerations being given to that? And the second part of the question is, obviously the cost of living and fuel poverty is up, regardless of the government change. We all know where that is. Is there more focus given to insulation and stuff like that? Thank you.
Just on the timing, we'll do this consultation now. All things being equal, we'll go back out to consultation roughly this time next year. I don't think we can be earlier than that. We don't want to be later than that. The end of that consultation will be in, I don't know, late November, early December next year. We'll then submit the plan for examination sometime after that. That will take a little while just to organise issues, and particularly if there's been something very fundamental brought up, and a certain amount of backwards and forwards with the barrister. Then there'll be a local plan inquiry. We don't know how long that will take. It depends whether there's an inspector available, and that is a really serious issue. There's a shortage at the moment. And then when the inspector's finished her or his report, that comes back to the council. We then have to decide whether to adopt it or not. I would suspect the best we could hope for, with luck, a fair wind, an inspector, and then a helpful inspector in roughly that order, would be 2024 Q3, Q4, something like that. So sometime the second half of 2024, that's when any new policies would kick in. Biodiversity net gain, on the specifics of that, that's actually something which is being driven by the Environment Act. And one of the things that the government is very clear on, I think rightly, is that local plans shouldn't repeat things which are required elsewhere, whether at national planning level or in something else. So we'll certainly be making references to it. The precise figure, we won't need a policy because it's defined by a national level piece of legislation. I think what we would be looking for is for, if there's off-site net gain, that it should be somewhere as close to the site in question as possible, rather than in the next county or indeed in another country or something unsatisfactory like that. But that's a kind of implementation thing. And on insulation, I think you coming on to that, but we have got some zero carbon issues there, and also refurbishment and retrofit policies, which are a shift.
Yeah, I think that's moved us quite nicely on to the next area of discussion, which is going to be about sort of the decarbonisation, net zero. I think we couldn't touch on biodiversity and things if people have a wish to do so. I am going to say that it's 7:24. I think in an ideal world, we could be done with this meeting at around 8 p.m. So I'm grateful if everyone could keep their contributions snappy and specific, and if they've got questions, bundle them together. Fantastic. I've seen 2 hands. I'm just going to get my note of who's got hands up. So if everyone could just, not everyone, that was such a stupid thing to say. Obviously not everyone. Yeah. It is, it's my own fault. Everyone who would like to contribute could raise their hands. Okay, less people. It was my fault for saying everyone. Okay, so I've got Councillor Miles, Councillor Jarvis, was that Councillor Hunt, and then also Councillor Pegg. Have I missed anyone? No, fantastic. Starting with Councillor Pegg and going around that way.
Yes, I'm sure Alex won't be surprised that I have many questions on the nature and biodiversity stuff, but I will try and keep this just to the top line ones. So first of all, I thought it was interesting, the section talking about Greenbelt and land, when it will be decided that land could be taken out of the Greenbelt. So I wonder if there was any more detail about how exactly that decision would be made, who would be making that decision, i.e. who's deciding that that land doesn't have value being in the Greenbelt. Then sort of linked to that, and
just answer that one,
yeah,
because I think it's unrelated to biodiversity. Greenbelt is a planning designation, it's not an environmental designation.
Yeah, but some Greenbelt land is going to also have biodiversity value.
Yeah. Some Greenbelt land, but equally some Greenbelt land doesn't have any biodiversity value. That's not why it's Greenbelt. It's Greenbelt to achieve a different end. The way in which Greenbelt land is de-designated is laid down in the NPPF. There's an exceptional circumstances test. At the last local plan, the extent of housing need in Oxford was an exceptional circumstance which justified the removal of, I think it was 7 in the end, wasn't it? 7 small portions of Greenbelt, one of which was about 3 square feet, so it really was small, out of the Greenbelt in Oxford, and then much larger removals outside Oxford as part of the local plans for the other districts. But it's not a biodiversity thing. It's a the purposes of the Greenbelt are laid out in law, but biodiversity isn't one of them.
I'll carry on with my questions. The other one was about reprovision of green space more generally, where they might be building on sites which have green space on them. And I just want to reiterate, like, kind of making sure that that is equitable, and how we're deciding that that is equitable. I'm sure that we're all aware that things like Bertie Park are very controversial on how it has been it's proposed that it would be re-provided, and whether there'll be policies to sort of set out what's acceptable. And linked to the idea of access to green space, is there any scope to have a target or something within the plan about access, like doorstep access, 5-minute access, whatever details you want to put that access to nature within the plan?
Right. So in answer to those, while there's a deliberation over whether the access to nature 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute test is implicit or explicit, I think it probably ought to be explicit, but whether we'd put it as a precise figure or whether it's something where we'd use a slightly looser term like near or close or easily accessible or something like that would be appropriate. We have got policies on doing essentially green cover tests. This is a new policy that we're bringing in, so not just biodiversity but actual green cover. And if you look at different parts of the city, we've actually got some areas where there's quite good green cover, whether it's green space or tree cover, and other areas it's pretty rubbish. And so we would look to have that as a new policy. It's a fairly simple calculator. If I could remember the page number off the top of my head, I would point you to it, but I'm hoping somebody will find it. But that would be a new way, I think, of achieving some of the ends you're talking about. Obviously, on a specific site provision, you mentioned Bertie Place. I mean, it was a site that was allocated for development in 2011 or whenever it was, and at that time, it was supposed to. The idea was it would be a primary school, and then if it wasn't a primary school, it would be housing. So yes, clearly there is a planning application which will come forward sometime this autumn, and the planning committee will have to decide whether that planning application meets the requirements of the policy as it's currently set out, and that would be how we try and handle that on a site-by-site basis, as well as the broader policies and the broader principles of where green space was being re-provided. I think the basic principle is near at hand, to be accessible, but also to form part of the green and blue infrastructure network so that things join up. I think that's a really critical point from biodiversity. Green spaces that sit in islands of concrete are of less use than green ribbons and blue ribbons which run through, and that's a critical part of our current local plan, and something we've added to and made more of in this local plan. But have I missed anything?
It's just reference to the policy options in G3, which is the urban greening factor. So that, I think that's what you were reaching for. So that's something new we're wanting to introduce, looking at
Paragraph 4.1.2.
There we are.
Or 4.12. Sorry. Yeah.
In terms of accessibility, the evidence base behind with our mapping for the 15-minute neighbourhood, we that came out of the work that we commissioned, that Ethos did, and so issues around accessibility to green spaces was part of that brief. So, but that's a good point, how we address that in policy, and we'll when we come to that part of when we start drafting, that will be something to be considering.
Did you want that as a recommendation about what is the doorstep?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be really useful just to be like super explicit about doorstep or nearby access to nature and what that means.
Well, I think we've got that down. Councillor Hunt.
I mean, yeah, my point was really relating to this idea of re-provision and green spaces. I mean, really it stems from the fact that poor old Sandy Lane West is still in here as a site to be turned into some sort of housing, whether that's possible. I mean, is that now set in stone, or is there still the possibility that that could be removed? Because the reality is, it is a green space. It's a 15-minute green space. It's hugely used by a lot of communities in a poorer part of Oxford. You know, Port Meadow wouldn't be down here in an allocated site. I feel very strongly that we're all actually on the same page. However, rather than re-providing green spaces, which we know doesn't work, and I've had a huge number of letters over the last few months about all the young trees that have been planted that nobody's been watering, that have all now died. And I just think we really need to have a heightened awareness that the green spaces we have must not be built on if they're a community site. And if there's any way of trying to highlight that, I think that is very, very important. Yeah, so it's connecting all these various points we've just made. And if, you know, we could look into that, I think that would be beneficial.
Well, I think I probably reflect a couple of points on that. I think there's green spaces and there's green spaces, and there's a wide range of biodiversity. And this comes back slightly to the greenbelt point, and biodiversity being two different things. You know, as somebody who grew up in East Anglia in a village, I can tell you there is very little biodiversity on a fen field. But there is a great deal of biodiversity in an urban hedge, for example. So I think the kind of thing that you're looking at is really important, and it's not just a kind of acreage issue. There is the other context that I wanted to flag is the one around the city's housing need and whether or not we're going to be able to have identify enough sites to meet it. One of the requirements of a local plan, in fact, it's the first requirement, and it's the one that's laid down, is that you need to identify the housing need for your area, and then you have to meet it. That's one of the tests. That's one of the sort of basic fundamental tests. If you don't do that, your local plan isn't going to pass the inspection, and it's going to come back to you until you do meet it, which is what happened to West Oxfordshire in the last round. So that being the case, we believe, as with our 2036 plan, that the housing need for Oxford will exceed our ability to meet it, which means that we would need to look to the local authorities across the border in the rest of Oxfordshire to meet what's called our unmet need. The way we did that last time, and the way, if we need to go down that route, we will need to do it this time, is to have the same set of criteria for how we identify those sites, both inside the city and outside. And I feel very strongly that's a fundamental test of whether we're approaching it fairly or not. In layman's terms, we cannot go to South Oxfordshire or to Cherwell or to Vale or to West Oxfordshire and say, please you give up your greenbelt sites, please you give up your greenfield sites, because that is what they have to meet our housing need, but we're not going to. We refuse to. That's not an acceptable approach, and they would rightly reject it. So what we did last time was to agree the same set of objective tests for assessing greenbelt, which was done by all the council's planners working together. And that was how greenbelt sites, both inside the city and outside the city, were identified as possible places to locate development. And I think that's something that we will need to take into account going forward with this local plan, just as we did on the last local plan. We need to demonstrate that we are the reasonable people in the room. And I don't think it is reasonable to expect other councils and the citizens of other councils to give up their land through a different approach than the one that we would apply ourselves.
Thank you. I think I'm also just going to ask that everyone make sure that when they're contributing, that no one else we're not going to be retreading old ground, if that makes sense. I think if we've got, you know, slightly differing perspectives in the room, then I'm not sure we're going to necessarily change minds here, but we can definitely leave recommendations if we want that to be reflected, if that makes sense. So I think that's probably the most effective way that we can take things forward if we agree as a committee. So without further ado, and that was not a subtweet. to Councillor Jarvis and Councillor Miles. It was genuinely a general point. So without further ado, go ahead.
Hopefully I can adhere to those rules and also be very brief. So I suspect you're going to tell me that you think that it's implicitly in there, but I noticed going through the documentation that there was no explicit reference to street trees and a street tree approach to managing street trees in the strategy, in the plan, sorry. I think given the significance and importance of street trees in relation to mitigation and adaptation, that would be a helpful thing to have in there. So I wondered if you could reflect on why that's omitted. I think if you're looking for Alex, then the only specific reference to street trees is in a quote from the planning guidance.
I think, because I think it was mentioned, I think the issue there is probably that the government has, whether we think it's wise or not, issued the planning guidance, which says that street trees are a requirement. So if we were to require street trees, it would be a repetition, which is what we're not allowed to do. Is that where we're at? I think we may need to address this. I mean, it's one of these things where, you know, the temptation when making a local plan is to kind of write in all the things you think are good out of the NPPF and repeat it, and we're explicitly barred from doing that. This won't stop us doing it to some extent, but we're not supposed to. So I think that's the situation with regard to street trees. I'd like to see it, probably it's a design guide issue where we might take those national design principles and apply them more locally, but I think street trees, you know, is a critical thing, and where it would fit best, warming to my theme, is in climate mitigation section, where clearly tree-lined streets are cooler, and it would fit in with design of buildings in particular ways and building forms. So, you know, courtyard type developments rather than our traditional British housing development, which is extremely bad at dealing with excessive summer temperatures, which are clearly getting worse. But I think that's probably, I'd be very happy to take that as a recommendation, I think. Yeah. Because it would fit around that climate mitigation issue, which if we've not been explicit, we can be there, I think.
So I think we've got that down as a recommendation. Now, I was also going to maybe say something a little bit more widely, maybe as a recommendation, is to make sure that when, for example, we aren't explicitly stating something because it's already in the NPPF or already in something else, because obviously this presumably intersects a little bit with the tree strategy stuff. Maybe there's some, I don't know, comms or something we could do, even if we can't explicitly state it, to make sure that, you know, people know. Sorry, this is a very kind of, my brain's falling apart way of phrasing it, but hopefully you managed to put it into something. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Maybe, yeah, if we could make that explicit in the recommendation, if that, yeah. Fantastic. Assume that was everything. So moving on to Councillor Miles, thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll try and be brief. A few different points. First of all, on page 52, which is where you've got a nice diagram which sets out adaptation mitigation. I wonder whether you could refer to, in the narrative text, the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, and also maybe structurally follow the kind of language that's used there. So we're talking about the mitigation adaptation, and within the adaptation agenda also loss and damage, because we talk later on about extreme weather events but without using some of that language, and I think it would be really helpful to reflect sort of what is these international frameworks that we're trying to operationalize to local level. So that is the first point. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Is that okay? Second point, and that refers to this whole issue of resilience building and adaptation and loss of damage related to that. So I think within reference to the resilient design and construction, the policy options, which I think is 160, there we talk a little bit about flooding at one point, I think, but I think we've got to think of it broader than just flooding, although that is what we anticipate to be the major impact. We've seen the heat the high winds are also more frequent and extreme, and there will be consequences. So some references there to that. But very specifically, these international frameworks talk about financial resilience building of infrastructure and looking at insurance and of buildings. And I'm wondering whether there might be some relevance there to be looking at what actually happens when these buildings are destroyed. Are the owners of the property owners, for instance, or the developers, insured against these risks in the development of their sites or of the buildings? It might be slightly off topic, but I don't know the extent to which that would be relevant, but it might be worth exploring. The final 2 points. One is around heritage assets and the retrofitting. I realise that we've got constraints of what the national policy framework is, but we're not going to be able to achieve our aims if we are not more proactive around retrofitting heritage assets as well. This debate of what trumps environmental conservation, heritage conservation rather than environmental conservation. When we've declared a climate emergency, we need to probably be a bit stronger on, even with heritage assets, we need to maybe presuming that we would retrofit them to ensure energy efficiency, that they're using solar, for instance, rather than say, sorry, we've got to protect the beauty of the landscape. Beauty is in our eye of beholder. Final point is on waste infrastructure, which is a separate point. I believe it relates to, but it is connected to, there is a little bit connection maybe to the flooding aspect. But with bin storage, I'm wondering whether, we're ideally hoping that everyone is going to be producing much less waste, so we won't need all of these bin storages. But are we able to be looking at ways in which we can aggregate the waste disposal in high density neighbourhoods? In the Netherlands, for instance, it's aggregated underground in a specific location, and there are environmental benefits of doing that as well. So I'm just wondering whether that could be addressed somehow in the waste infrastructure. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of really interesting points there. Completely agree with you about the resilience and mitigation points, and that's something that we hope we've drawn out and we can do more. More than happy to reflect some of the language a little more explicitly. There will be background papers accompanying the local plan, so if that's a topic of someone's interest, they can dive into much more detail than we've provided even in the lengthy local plan document that's attached to the report today. So yes, I think we did highlight flooding because we know that's been a particular Oxford implication, but yes, we can look at broadening that a little.
It's quite heavy on cooling and heating.
Can I take that away and have a look at it then? Thank you. On the insurance point, I'm not sure there's anything the local plan could really do on that. That would be helpful or meaningful, really. I think that might be beyond our remit, I'm afraid. Just on the heritage and retrofitting point, I'm aware this is quite a live issue. I would say that there will be an appropriate retrofitting solution to most heritage buildings. The onus of the local planning authority is to help encourage landowners and property owners to think about what's the most appropriate retrofitting solution for their own property. It will vary hugely depending on the property, the circumstances, the orientation, the windows, all sorts of things. What we're really trying to do is to encourage people to think about retrofitting in a holistic way. So instead of perhaps responding to a flyer that someone's put through the door about new PVC double glazing, that's the best answer to carbon emissions from my property. Perhaps stepping back and thinking there may be a better solution for my property. So what we're trying to do, the heritage team is part of my team as well as the policy team. We're trying to find a way to provide advice and signposts to property owners to get them to think sensitively about their property. It might not be, let's stick a mini wind turbine on the roof. There may be a better solution for their property. I think one of the challenges that we find is that lots of people who understandably want to do the best they can reach for quite perhaps an obvious solution, and it might not be right in every setting. So it's getting people to think about what the right solution for their property is. And I think we can do a little bit on that in the local plan, but I think we can do more on that outside of the local plan as well, about the advice and the signposts that we give people. On bin storage, I mean, from a planner point of view, I want to make sure that the developments that are built are operationally fit. And I want to make sure that the bin lorries can go around the corners, that the bins can be stored in a safe, secure place, that they don't impact on the street. And I suppose that's really my focus. I think the kind of thing you're talking about, and I know exactly what you mean, that's like a much bigger waste strategy change of approach, I think, than can be brought in through the local plan, because if I forced one development to do it that way, if all the rest of the street goes about it the other way, it's not necessarily likely to be the most effective, I think. But that's clearly something that we can think of on a broader picture. So my instinct is I'm not sure the local plan can really go as far as you might like it to on that, whether this will be encouraging.
I think the thing, like what the local plan can do is not prevent.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to build a development on that principle, then if they can make it work with a waste disposal company, then that's fine. So I think we would not prevent it, is the issue.
Brilliant. I think that takes us to the end of our discussion on this. I think we've got a hefty ton of recommendations and minutes, and that was a really brilliant discussion. So thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for coming along and fielding all of our questions and points and things. Brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay.
A-Ford, it's A-Ford. I will send you an email right now. Thank you. Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, I was a bit worried about addressing a specific. I live in a neighbourhood where this is an issue, so I was didn't want to bring it up. Yeah, but I did find the specific reference just for you, and I wrote it down here. Good.
It was at the Liberal.
The Lib Dem briefing. Yeah, I wrote it down somewhere. Yeah. Okay. So I will put it in the email now. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, it might be.
Okay, so we are now moving to a private session in accordance with paragraph 4 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. which includes information relating to any consultations or negotiations or contemplated consultations or negotiations in connection with any labour relations matter arising between the authority or a minister of the Crown and employees of or office holders under the authority. And then we're going to stop the, pardon? Oh,